before we get started talking about the two programs, we would like to say a little bit about the overall CHSTM community. And these pictures are probably difficult to see, but they should give you an idea of the kinds of things that are going on. It's not just classwork around here. You're not just engaged in coursework. We have quite a lot of social events. We have quite a lot of intellectual events. In addition to our colloquium series, there's one for the postgraduates that the postgraduates organize, and then there's another that the staff organize and postgraduates usually attend. In addition to those sort of formal colloquia, we have lots and lots of other kinds of intellectual and social activities going on. So for instance, there's Planet B, which we've already mentioned. It's not an official activity of our program, but a number of students who are involved in the PhD or either of the master's programs are involved in producing this science magazine, which is the Manchester Student Voice on Science. And they do everything from writing stories to producing artwork to assembling the magazine technically. And this started, it's in its second year now, and it's been very popular. So they meet regularly here and talk about how they're producing their next issues. We also do a fair amount of, this is a picture of us sitting at the Science and Industry Museum over in Deansgate, which many of you have probably been to. But we got a behind the scenes tour because we usually go over during Welcome Week and take advantage of our connections at the museum to get to know the people who work there and the kinds of activities they have. In fact, a number of our students end up volunteering at the museum to get additional experience, and some even do research projects that involve the museum. We also have the occasional film night. We watched Fantastic Voyage this autumn, had lots of popcorn and other unhealthy treats, thus violating our health communication goals. But we watched Fantastic Voyage, which was, of course, a late 1960s film in which a medical team was shrunk down to travel through the body of a scientist and to save him so that the free world could be saved. Lots of combination of Cold War politics and inventive, imaginative renderings of immunology and bodily processes, and lots of fun. We had a good time. And another example of the kind of thing that people do, this is a tweet by one of our PhD students, Francesca Elliott, but it was actually part of a British Society for the History of Science conference that was entirely run through Twitter. It was a tweeted conference. And several of our postgraduates here were instrumental in setting that up and running it, as well as presenting their own research as part of it. So our postgraduates, whether they be on the top programs or on the research programs, often do activities like this. And that's the same whether they're on the Master's in Science Communication pathway or on the HSTM pathway. So hopefully that gives you a little more sense of the community. We do other things next week. A group of us, about 30 of us actually, we're going to the National Museum of Science and Media in Bradford for a behind the scenes tour. We also have regular outings to various kinds of field trips in the area and social activities. And we share that across all our programs. So no matter which program you're applying to, you're going to be part of the CHSTM community, more largely written. So shall I tell you a little bit about the Master's in Science Communication program? This is, does anyone recognize this? It's Jodrell Bank. So I managed to get a very arty shot on one of our field trips there. I am currently the program director for the Master's in Science Communication, and I'm going to give you information about what the program will look like for the next year. We have a deputy program director, Harriet Palfreman, who's absolutely wonderful. And she and I, together with many of our colleagues here in the HSTM program, do a lot of the teaching on the course, although we also have colleagues from other parts of the university, such as the business school, involved with providing that teaching. And probably what you are wondering, because of course we all have to think about the future, what am I going to do with my degree? Where will you end up if you have a degree in science communication? Duncan will tell you in a little bit some of the places our graduates in HSTM have ended up. And some people are listed on both of these because they did a lot of science communication work while doing an HSTM master's or vice versa. But we have a large number of graduates where this is our 4th class. And over the past couple of years, here are some of the places where people have ended up. Many of them have gone into doing communications outreach and engagement for professional societies or for academic institutions or specialty institutions. For instance, one of our grads has recently taken over as a communications officer at the European Molecular Biology Laboratory. Others have moved on to do policy analysis or work at museums. Some have moved a few have moved into the very difficult but very exciting world of producing media, visual media, whether that be film or television. Others have gone to work for various kinds of charities, such as Cancer Research UK. I don't have listed up here, but a number of our graduates have also gone on to manage public outreach and engagement activities at various universities and within the science faculties of various universities. So for instance, we've got a recent graduate is doing that now at King's for one of the science faculties. We've got someone doing that for one of the university hospitals in Southampton, and so on. They go into those kinds of positions. Or a number of our graduates have gone into the private sector, whether that's working as medical writers for any of the various medical firms that are here in London or elsewhere in the Northwest. Hovis Links is of course one of the best known ones, but there are several other medical communications firms in the area. And others have gone into fields like pharmaceutical consulting or into healthcare public relations. So there's a whole variety of things that you can do with a science communication degree. You could work in a museum, but it's not just working in a museum. There's really a wide spectrum of things that you can do. So what does the program look like? I'll tell you first about the structure for full-time students and then go over how that differs for part-time students. Basically what we do is our goal with the program is to bring together practical skills and experience, particularly in writing for a variety of different kinds of media and outlets, with an overall thoughtful, critical, and theoretical understanding of what science and health communication are about. What I usually say is, we're not going to teach you the absolute nitty-gritty skills. I'm not going to teach you how to pick up a camera and film. But what I will teach you is how to think about your audience, how to think about preparing and storyboarding a film, and how to think about how that fits in an overall campaign or educational intervention. So this is not a very skills-oriented practical course. It's a course that matches theoretical and critical background with some practical skills and an ability to think widely across those. So with that in mind, in the first semester, you have 3 modules. One of them is our large module, which is Introduction to Science Communication. It's kind of the core. It gives you a sense of the variety of things that fall under science communication. That phrase hides quite a lot. For instance, we have sessions about risk communication, health communication, about the special challenges involved in doing arts and science or doing arts and health. We have sessions on using social media. We have sessions on how to analyze social media. So really quite a lot is covered. We do sessions on climate change communication, lots of the different specialty areas, together with a good overall background in science communication. You will also take 2 smaller modules. One of these is Communicating Ideas, which is a module that is shared. You'll take it alongside the Masters in HSTM. And that module runs the first half of the first semester. And it's basically to help everybody who joins our programs retool a little bit. Because many of the people who join us, very few of them actually have a background in the history of science, technology, and medicine, or in science communication. They usually have a background in history generally, communication generally, or science and technology generally. So what this module does, the Communicating Ideas module, is sort of gets everybody on a common path in terms of thinking about how to write for diverse audiences, how to present to diverse kinds of academic audiences, and just sort of retooling to think about when to use that science voice and when to switch to a very different kind of voice. We also have a course called Contemporary Issues in STM, Science, Technology, and Medicine, and that basically overlaps with the major themes in History of Science, Technology, and Medicine course. And our reasoning for that is we think that even if you're doing science communication and you're not all that interested in history, it's still important to know about the history of science, technology, and medicine. The example that I frequently use is if you're going to go out and do a project where you're communicating about genetics, risk, and medical decision-making, you probably should know something about the history of eugenics, right? You should have some perspective on where that kind of decision-making has come from. So the idea of this course is that it gives you an overview of the last century in the history of science, technology, and medicine, and helps you think about how that history may have influenced people's reactions to, understanding of, participation in science and medicine now. In semester 2, we switched to a much more, could say practical, could say pragmatic orientation. We offer 4 different options modules: science, media, and journalism, science, government, and public policy, museums and public events, and health communication. You can see that these are all fairly focused, right? The idea of these is that this is your chance to specialize a little bit more. But as part of that, we have real-world practitioners come in and talk about their own careers, their own methods, their own experiences, and they also work with us and work with students to help them develop their skills on things like pitching an idea for a story. So we have journalists come in, we've had people come from The Economist, from BuzzFeed, we've had film producers come in, all sorts of different things. Other courses, we go on field trips to go visit various things. So the idea is that these 4 specialized modules that you take 2 for credit, and that allows you to sort of follow your particular interests. But the way they're arranged, none of them overlap in terms of time, so you can always go sit in on others whenever you want. Because we know that sometimes people see some things here and there that they would like to do. You also do a mentored project, and a mentored project is where essentially it's not like a placement or an internship where you go somewhere and work 5 days a week and make coffee and file things, although there are precious few of those kinds of internships anymore. But what it is basically we connect you with some sort of group or institution that does something related to science and health communication, and you take on a small project for them, almost like a subcontractor. And the professionals there help mentor you and give you advice about how to create that project. And I'll give you some ideas in a minute about what some of those projects are like. People find it to be a really useful experience in terms of moving what you learn in these specialized modules into actual practice. Also, by having it in semester 2, it gives you a little chance to make connections before you start looking for a job, right? You have to always be thinking about that. Then finally, over the summer, meaning roughly June through the end of August, you'll work on a research project. And let me give you an idea about what those research projects look like, because they aren't quite the same as what you might think of as a traditional research project. Before I do that though, I will mention that part-time is also an option, and we always have a number of students taking the course part-time. If you do that, what you will do is you'll basically take the big intro module the first year, you'll take one of the options modules, and then you'll do your mentored project in the summer. Then the next year you'll catch up on these 2 smaller courses, take another options module, and then do your research project. So, and it's a pretty clear pathway, it's pretty easy to do. We have people doing either pathway, part-time or full-time. Our options modules, like I've mentioned, they are more specialized. And the thing that's really good about them, I think, and our students always think, is that they do involve a large number of people who do some variety of science and health communication. So for instance, this is a not very attractive photo, but actually a great event from my health communication module this spring. And these two people, this is Sarah Kenny. She is a writer and producer. This is Jacob. He is a cartoonist. And basically, Sarah wrote this comic book called Surgeon X, which tells a story about what would a future without effective antibiotics look like. So Sarah and Jacob came to our class on health communication to talk about how we use fictional narratives to tell stories about medicine. And as part of that, they worked with our class for them to start developing their own comics and talk about what worked and what didn't and where else they should look. So that's what happens in a lot of these different modules. We have a lot of visitors come in, we have a lot of field trips that we undertake so that you get exposure to the real world. Now the Mentered projects, as I mentioned, the idea with the Mentered project is that it is fairly practical. And you'll see that we've listed a number of the different kinds of Mentered projects people have done in the past. They're usually in association with the Manchester institution of some sort, but not necessarily. We've had people do them in Newcastle or London as it works for their schedule. So they're usually undertaking something fairly independently. For instance, last year we had a student who planned and evaluated a late event at the Manchester Museum. As you know, late events are usually intended to try to get more adults to come to the museum in the evenings for more of a social activity. And she planned the whole thing, ran the social media, did the evaluation, wrote it up, the whole thing. Others have done things like writing materials for the Manchester Cancer Research Center. We've had someone create a genetics-themed board game for use in clinic circumstances. Developing social media plans for existing exhibits or events that are being planned here in the science faculty. Creating podcast series. We've currently got a very large group who are creating a film about a new user-designed setup at the new Eureka Museum, which is opening in Merseyside soon. So we've got a whole group working together to produce a little film about that. So that's the kind of mentored projects that people usually do. Now the research projects, they usually have a practical orientation as much as they are concerned with academic learning and science communication. So the idea is that you focus in on a larger question in science communication, like how do we best do evaluation? Or how do we communicate with diverse audiences? Or how does accessibility influence the way people experience exhibits? What you will do is you will take that to a particular instance and analyze it. So some of the really successful research projects we've had, for instance, we had someone who analyzed how climate change documentaries employ emotional appeals. And the idea there is to think about the structure of filmmaking and how it sends a message to viewers that may not be written into the actual script, right? And what kind of response does that get? Or we've had people do things like look at how mothers use social media to respond to National Health Service campaigns like Change for Life. And that takes on the question of how is it that people actually respond to health communication? We're surrounded by a lot of health communication that's thrown at us every day, but how do we actually react and talk back to it? And she was able to look at that through a smaller study. Others have done things like look at how physics and celebrity play out in social media, which is of course a great question for the University of Manchester. But all sorts of, everything from analysis of media to actual analysis of interventions. All of those are the kinds of research projects that people have done.